I've always been drawn to old houses. Not to those that have been carefully restored for tourists, but to those that stand forgotten, with rotten shutters and cracks in the stones. This was the Hartwick estate, massive as a tomb, with windows like empty eye sockets. My grandfather bought it in the 60s, calling it a family project. None of us knew then that this project would last for generations, overgrown with bones, whispers and questions that it is better not to look for answers. I remember the first time I saw him when I was 7 years old. My grandfather led me by the hand along an alley strewn with rubble and broken bottles. The wind whistled through the broken stained glass windows, and the heavy oak door creaked as if it had been opened for the last time a century ago. The interior smelled of mold, dust, and something sour. I later learned that it was the smell of old plaster mixed with rotting wood. Grandfather lit a kerosene lamp, and the light picked out the walls from the darkness, covered with a web of cracks. A family lived here, he said, but they disappeared. All except one. His voice trembled, as if he wasn't talking about the dead, but about something that still walks through these rooms. Over the years, I've learned the history of the Hartwicks. They were not nobles, they got rich in the leather trade, built this estate in the wilderness, away from prying eyes. It was said that old Hartwick, the founder of the family, was a cruel man. I found letters in the archives that he wrote to his wife, "The baby is crying at night again. Tell the maid to put a cloth in his mouth, otherwise I'll take care of it myself." The letters were getting darker and darker. The last one was dated 1693, the walls are whispering. I can hear them even during the day. They know what I did. After that, the family fell silent forever. When I turned 16, my grandfather allowed me to help with the renovation. We started with the east wing. I found a door under the wallpaper, a tiny one built into the wall. Behind it was a room the size of a closet. The floor was strewn with decayed children's dresses, and someone had scratched the word "sorry" on the wall with a knife. My grandfather silently collected the rags in a bag and told me to forget. But I came back at night with a flashlight. There was a diary under the dresses. A girl, about 10 years old, wrote about rooms under the floor, where her father took the servants and they never returned. Last entry, Mom said he was crazy. He picked up Jane today. I hid, but he'll find me, too. A week later, we found the first body. Or rather, what's left of it. While repairing the kitchen, Grandfather fell into the basement, which was not listed on the plans. There, under a pile of bricks, was a skeleton. There is an axe crack on the skull. There was an iron chain chained to the wall nearby. Grandfather called the police, but they only took the bones, saying that these bones are 300 years old. The next day, the grandfather disappeared. He was found in the same room with the dresses. The doctor said heart, but I saw his face. It was distorted as if he was trying to scream, but did not have time. I'm 34 now. I live in this house because it can't be sold. Every new owner goes crazy or dies. Yesterday, while dismantling the fireplace in the dining room, I found an iron door behind the bricks. Beyond it is a narrow tunnel. It led to a dungeon where rusty hooks hang from the ceiling, and knives with a dried brown crust lie on a stone table. I also found a box there. It contains Hartwick's notes. He described how he tortured the servants, suspecting them of collusion with the devil. Last page, they said they would take my children. I have to hide them where no one else is. Next is a blood-like blob. I'm writing this by the light of a lantern. Upstairs, in the old hall, something fell. I think it's the wind. Or not. Do you hear that? The creak of floorboards. It's like someone is cautiously walking down the hallway. I should probably check. The lantern was shaking in my hand, casting bouncing shadows on the walls. The creaking was repeated, closer now. I went up the stairs, trying to step on the edges of the steps so as not to give myself away by creaking. The air in the old hall was thick as syrup, and every breath burned my lungs with the smell of rot and old wood. The door to the living room opened a couple of centimeters. I pushed it with my shoulder, and the hinges screeched so loudly that my heart stopped for a second. Inside, everything is as it was in my grandfather's time, an armchair with a sunken bottom, a mirror in an ebony frame covered with a web of cracks. But there was a doll lying on the floor by the fireplace. She was ragged, with burned-out button eyes. Her dress was dark, as if soaked, something. I picked up the doll. Something crunched inside, under the fabric. Tearing the seam, I pulled out a bundle of yellowed paper. On it, in a child's handwriting, was written, "He's still looking for me." I hid where there is a smell of smoke. Smoke. Fireplace. I rushed back to the dining room. The tunnel behind the bricks led to the dungeon. But how could the child know about the fireplace? Except that, if the descent wasn't the only entrance. Examining the walls, I noticed that one of the panels under the ceiling bulges slightly. I set up the ladder and yanked it off. There was a gap behind it, a narrow manhole leading to an attic room. The dust on the floor there was disturbed, clear prints of bare feet, small as if they were children's. The footprints led to a chest filled with old blankets. There is a hatch under them. The rusty hinges howled as I lifted the lid. A staircase led down, but not to the dungeon, but somewhere towards the forest. There was a piece of cloth on the bottom step, a piece of shirt with bloodstains. I went down. The tunnel was low, and I had to walk bent over. The walls have collapsed in places, probably from old age. After 100 meters, the passage hit a grate. There's a room behind it. No, it's not a room. Cell. The bars are covered with rust, there's a bowl of moldy water on the floor, and a rotted blanket next to it. And on the wall. There are scratches on the wall. Hundreds of lines, as if someone had been counting the days for years. And among them is the inscription, "I'm scared. Dad said I have to live here until I'm good." There was a bone in the corner. Human, thin as a finger. I ran back, stumbling over the rocks. Fragments from the girl's diary were spinning in my head. He took Jane. Jane, or another victim. But then what does it have to do with footprints in my house now? When I returned to the dining room, I heard a knock. Not from above, but from under the floor. It was like someone was punching the ceiling of a dungeon. I took the tire iron and went downstairs. The rusty hooks swayed as if they had just been grazed. There was now a puddle on the stone table where the knives were lying, water was dripping from the ceiling. And yet, there was a footprint in the sand by the wall. An adult shoe. Modern. Someone was here. Recently. I climbed out, trembling with rage and fear. In the living room, my notebook was lying on the piano with the lid off. There's an inscription on the open page that wasn't there before. You shouldn't have found this. My tea in the mug in the kitchen was still warm. So whoever wrote this, he's still here. I grabbed a kitchen knife, an old one with a jagged blade that was always in the drawer. My hand was shaking, but the adrenaline was drowning out the fear. He's here. Somewhere between these walls that remember too much. The first thing I did was check the attic. The stairs creaked under the weight, as if warning an uninvited guest. In the dusty semi-darkness, among the chests of rags, I noticed a fresh chip on the beam, as if something heavy had been dropped. There was a piece of rope nearby, frayed at the edges. I didn't have time to bend down to examine it when I heard a rumble from below, as if the door had slammed shut from a draft. Going down, I came across a spot on the wall of the staircase. Dark, sticky. Blood? When I touched it, it smelled of iron and something chemical. Maybe with paint? I didn't guess. My grandfather's office was in chaos. Someone had rummaged through the drawers, papers were lying on the floor, and the secretary was broken into. But strangely, it wasn't the money that was stolen from the box, but the old photos. The ones where grandfather is standing at the entrance to the estate with someone else's family. I hadn't noticed the back of one of them before. The agreement has been respected. They won't be coming back. Suddenly, a whisper came from the hallway. Not a voice, but a sound like cloth rubbing against wood. I pressed myself against the wall, catching movement in the mirror out of the corner of my eye. Human. A tall man in a dark jacket flashed in the doorway. "Stop!" I shouted, running out into the hallway. His footsteps echoed hollowly in the west wing. I ran, stumbling over scattered bricks, until I crashed into a locked door. Heavy breathing could be heard from behind her. "Who are you?" He punched a tree. "What do you need?" The answer was the click of the lock. The door opened, but the room was empty. Just an open window, shutters slamming, and a fresh trail of dirt on the windowsill. I leaned out, and there was a drainage pipe below the window that could be used to get down. And footprints. Dirty boots led to the forest. But I didn't pursue it. Instead, he looked around the room. There was a phone on the floor, among the pieces of a broken vase. Not mine. Modern, with a cracked screen. There is only one video in memory. On the record, night, infrared camera. My house. Someone in a hood is digging a hole near an old oak tree. Then the camera turns and I see myself sleeping in an armchair by the fireplace. Date, last Thursday. My throat was dry. So he was watching. Days, weeks, maybe months. What for? After returning to the dungeon, I examined the stone table. I hadn't noticed before that one of the knives was cleaner than the others. Someone was using it. On the floor, under the table, there was a piece of newspaper, a local chronicle from a month ago. A girl has disappeared, 24 years old, red hair. There's an ink mark in the margins, Jane. The name from the girl's diary. A coincidence? No. It's a message. He repeats the story of Hartwick. I went looking for him. In the pantry, behind the boxes of nails, I found a trapdoor in the floor. Another tunnel, narrow as a slit. He crawled, scraping his knees on the rocks. At the end is a room with an earthen floor. And her. Tied to a chair, gagged. Red hair, bruised face. Jane from the newspaper. She squirmed when she saw me, but it only lasted a second. Her eyes widened, not with fear, but with recognition. You. She whispered as I undid the gag. You're the boss. He said you were aware? Who? I don't know the name. In the hood. He said it was correcting the mistakes of the past. A stone crunched behind him. I turned around. He was standing in the aisle. Knife in hand, face hidden by a mask. Welcome to the family business, a hoarse voice said. His knife flashed in the light of my flashlight, which was thrown on the floor. Jane clutched at my arm, her nails digging into my skin, but I didn't take my eyes off the mask. Black cloth, no slits, as if the face had been erased. A family business? I gasped, retreating to the wall. The hand holding the kitchen knife was shaking. You're crazy. Crazy? He shook his head sharply, and his voice sounded mocking. Your grandfather knew. And his father. You are all guardians. There was a clink behind Jane. I caught a glimpse of her picking up a piece of brick from the floor. The mask didn't notice. Guardians of what? Corpses in the walls? I took a step to the left, distracting him. Hartwick died 300 years ago, and you're the next maniac? He laughed, a sound like the creak of unoiled hinges. Hartwick didn't die. He was being reborn. Through the blood. The knife in his hand wavered, pointing at me. You're the last one. And you've ruined everything. Jane moved. A piece of brick smashed into his temple. The mask had slid to one side, revealing a long scar running from temple to chin. He growled and turned to her, but I had already jumped. My knife sank into my shoulder, the blade sliding off the bone. He pulled away, punched me in the stomach. The air flew out of my lungs, and I fell to my knees. Run! I shouted to Jane, grabbing his leg. She darted to the aisle. He started after her, but I grabbed my jacket. The fabric is torn. A key fell out of an inner pocket, an antique one with a coat of arms in the form of intertwined snakes. He froze for a second, as if he was afraid of losing the key, and that was enough. Jane disappeared into the tunnel. I hit his knee with my head, and he collapsed, hitting a shelf with cans. The glass broke, and there was a smell of chemicals. I ran, grabbing the key as I ran. The tunnel wound like a maze. Jane was waiting around the corner, hiding in an alcove. Here, she waved her hand. We ran, stumbling, until we fell out into an old laundry room. The trapdoor was covered with a floorboard. We went out into the yard, into the thick of the nettles. The rain was lashing my face. We have to go to the city, Jane said breathlessly. I have it there. He knows every inch of it. We need proof. Key. Coat of arms of snakes. I remembered, it was the same one on the seal in Hartwick's letters. We returned through the back door. I found a safe in my grandfather's office, behind the portrait of the founder of the family. The key fitted. There is a folder inside. Photo. Modern. Men, women, all with the same scar on their face. And the last photo is of a grandfather shaking hands with a man in a hat. On the back, renewal of the agreement. 1987. Jane grabbed my hand. Look! There was a map of the county on the wall. There are dozens of crosses, with a date next to each one. The last one was yesterday. These are places, she whispered, where he was digging. There was a crash. The office door swung open. He was standing on the threshold, holding an axe in his hand. The scar on his face was glowing purple. The inheritance cannot be destroyed, he hissed. You're part of the chain. I'll rip it up, I said, grabbing the folder. We rushed through a secret door in the wall leading to the wine cellar. He chased, knocking down shelves. The bottles were breaking, the wine was pouring like blood. There's another trapdoor in the cellar. On the edge, I pushed Jane. Down. She disappeared into the darkness. I turned to him, clutching the glass from the bottle in my hand. Your grandfather was afraid of this place, he stepped closer. But you're stubborn. Not me, I grinned. You were wrong to give me the key. And he threw the folder into a puddle of wine. The papers were soaked, the ink was floating. He roared, rushing to save the documents, and I jumped into the hatch. There's a river below. Underground, icy. Jane was already floating towards the light in the distance. I dived, feeling the axe slam into the hatch jam above my head. The icy water squeezed his chest like a vice. I swam almost without feeling my hands, focusing only on the light ahead, dim as the moon through the clouds. Jane surfaced first, clutching at the roots hanging from the shore. I followed, spitting out the mud and shaking all over. Here, she pointed to the cliff, where the gap was black. A cave? Yes, but not natural. The walls were leveled with pickaxes, and there were cart tracks on the floor. The old mine. We moved inside, stumbling over the moss-covered rails. Water splashed somewhere behind him. He was not far behind. The mine branched. I dragged Jane along with me until I hit the bars. Behind it is a vertical shaft with a rusty ladder. Up there! I hissed. The steps bent under the weight, crumbled underfoot. Jane screamed as her shoe fell through the hole, but I managed to grab her jacket. There was a hatch at the top. Locked up. Here you go. Jane held out her palms, and I stood on them, hitting the rust with my shoulder. The hatch gave way on the third try. We got out in the woods, 100 meters from the house. The rain had stopped, but the wind was howling like a wounded animal. I still had the folder in my pocket, wet but intact. Get in the car, I said, remembering that the keys were in the garage. But the garage was open. There are broken headlights and punctured tires inside. On the windshield there is an inscription with a knife. Where to? Jane pulled me toward the path. I know the way. She didn't finish. He jumped out of the bushes, without a mask, with a scar distorted by rage. He holds an axe in his hand. The folder, he croaked. Or she'll die first. Jane darted to the side, but he was faster. The axe whistled, plunging into the tree next to her head. I charged, hitting him in the back with a rock. He fell to his knees, dropping his weapon. Run! I shouted to Jane, leaning on him with all my weight. She ran. I hit his hands with a rock until he let go of the axe. His fingers dug into my throat, but I managed to grab the blade. You don't understand, he pressed, his eyes wild. We're protecting. The blade entered his side. He groaned, weak. I broke free and ran after Jane. There is a road at the edge of the forest. Jane waved her hands in front of the truck. The driver, a bearded man, was already braking. Help me! Stop it, she screamed. They're following us. We stumbled into the cabin. The truck took off as his figure flashed in the mirror, bloodied and staggering. He threw a stone at us, hitting the side. To the police, I told the driver. Right now. Jane stared out the window in silence. She had my phone in her hand, and she was taking down a folder, page by page. Look, she showed the photo. Grandfather, men in suits, and the mayor of the city. They're all connected. I closed my eyes. His words echoed in my head, we are protecting. From what? Or, from whom? The truck stopped at the police station, but I forced the driver to drive on. Where to? He asked. To the newspaper office. Jane didn't argue. She understood that if the mayor was in on it, then the local cops would only sign our death warrant. The editor, a skinny man with glasses, wanted to kick us out at first. Until I saw the photo. His fingers shook as he looked at the faces in the pictures. Do you know who these people are? He looked up at me. Half of them are dead. The other half is the elite of the state. And these, Jane put a printout from the county map on the table, are the places where he buried the bodies. Check it out. She was right. The next day, an excavator dug out the first skeleton under an old oak tree. Then another one. And more. Only 12. The age of the remains ranges from 30 years to a couple of months. The news talked about the biggest serial killer case in the last half-century. But not a word about the folder, about the photo, about the connections. He was found a week later. The dead one. In the river, 5 miles from my house. The autopsy showed that he was killed before the body was thrown into the water. Stabbed in the back. The colleagues cleaned up the tracks. The Hartwick house was demolished. According to the court's decision, as an object threatening public safety. Before that, I took out the only thing from there, the girl's diary. His pages are now in the safe, next to copies of all the documents that we gave to the journalists. Jane is gone. She changed her name and moved to the other side of the country. Sometimes he sends postcards without a return address. On the last one, she wrote, "They're still watching. Be careful." But I stayed. I live in a trailer on the edge of the forest, where I can see the field where the estate used to stand. Sometimes at night it seems to me that through the noise of the trees I can hear the creaking of floorboards. But it's the wind. Probably. The photo folder disappeared from the editorial office a month later. The editor was fired. The articles were minimized. But I made copies. They're hidden where they'll find me if something happens to me. There was a rock on the trailer doorstep this morning. There's a note attached to it. The contract is still in force. The handwriting is familiar, grandfather's. I burned the note. Then he took out a knife. And I'm waiting.